Break up this welfare birthday party. These people don't belong in our park. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell storms toward the celebration and flips the entire birthday table. 8-year-old Marcus's Spider-Man cake explodes across the concrete, along with plates of food and wrapped presents. She stomps on gift boxes, crushing toys inside. Look at all this food bought with taxpayer money while hardworking Americans struggle. Parents scramble to shield their children as Mitchell kicks over chairs and tears down decorations. The beautiful birthday setup becomes a wasteland of destruction in seconds. She zeroes in on a tall black man who is hanging streamers near the pavilion. He turns slowly, his face a mask of controlled fury as he watches his son's special day being destroyed. You the one responsible for this ghetto circus, boy. Time to shut it down and learn your place. The father stands motionless, his hands trembling as he stares at the ruined party. One phone call will change everything these officers think they know about power. 2 hours earlier, James Thompson had been the picture of a devoted father preparing the perfect birthday celebration. He moved methodically around Druid Hill Park, checking every detail with the precision of someone who understood that memories mattered. The red and blue streamers hung at exactly the right height. The picnic tables formed a perfect rectangle. Even the placement of each folding chair seemed calculated for maximum joy. "Baby, you're being obsessive again," Maya called from across the pavilion, her voice carrying the gentle teasing of 8 years of marriage. She was arranging gift bags with their son's name written in careful cursive, but her eyes kept drifting to her husband's constant surveillance of their surroundings. James paused in hanging the Happy 8th Birthday Marcus banner, his gaze automatically scanning the park's entrance, the tree line, the parking lot. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had kept him alive for 15 years in federal law enforcement. But today wasn't about Agent Thompson. Today was about Dad. "I just want everything perfect for Marcus," he replied, adjusting the banner one final time. "He's been talking about this party for weeks." The community had started arriving an hour ago, and James knew each family by name. 8 months of carefully constructed normalcy had built these relationships. Mrs. Washington from 2 blocks over, whose arthritis flared up in the humidity but who still brought her famous potato salad to every gathering. The Johnson twins, whose father worked double shifts at the shipyard just to afford their school supplies. Young Keisha's grandmother, who made the best cornbread in East Baltimore and never missed a community event despite her failing eyesight. James had memorized their stories, their struggles, their hopes. It wasn't just good cover for his undercover assignment tracking Lieutenant Mitchell's corruption network. These people had become his people. He'd attended their church services, helped fix broken porch steps, and driven elderly neighbors to medical appointments. Every genuine moment of connection made the deception weigh heavier on his conscience. Marcus burst from behind a tree where he'd been playing hide-and-seek with his cousins, his Spider-Man shirt already grass-stained from an afternoon of pure 8-year-old joy. He crashed into his father's legs with the enthusiasm only children possessed, nearly knocking over the cooler full of juice boxes. "Dad, this is the best birthday ever!" Marcus looked up with eyes that held complete trust in his father's ability to make everything right. "All my friends are here, and Mom made my favorite cake with the web design, and you even got the Spider-Man decorations I wanted, and Mrs. Johnson brought those cookies that taste like heaven." James knelt down to his son's eye level, fighting the familiar tightness in his chest that came with leading a double life. Every innocent question Marcus asked about his construction job felt like a small betrayal. Every time his son introduced him proudly to friends as "my dad who builds important buildings," James felt the weight of lies he'd have to explain someday. "You deserve the best birthday, champ. You only turn 8 once," James said, ruffling his son's hair. "Did you thank Mrs. Johnson for those cookies?" "Already did, and I helped Grandma Washington set up her folding chair because her hands were hurting today." Marcus beamed with the pride of a child who'd been raised to care about his community. But even as he spoke, James's trained eye caught movement at the park entrance. His hand instinctively moved to check his concealed badge, a habit so ingrained he barely noticed doing it anymore. The FBI shield was tucked safely in his jacket pocket, along with his service weapon and emergency beacon disguised as his wedding ring. 8 months of surveillance had documented Mitchell's drug conspiracy. Her systematic targeting of black communities, her network of corrupt officers who treated their badges like licenses to terrorize. James. Maya's voice carried a warning note. She'd learned to read his micro-expressions after years of watching him come home from cases that left invisible scars. The subtle shifts in his jaw that meant his agent instincts were kicking in, the way his shoulders tensed when danger signals fired in his brain. Not today. Whatever you're thinking, not today. This is Marcus's day. He forced himself to relax, to be present in this moment with his family. The surveillance photos on his phone could wait. Images of Mitchell taking envelopes full of drug money from known dealers. The recorded conversations documenting her racist rants could wait. Audio of her calling community gatherings breeding grounds for criminals. The federal investigation that had consumed 8 months of his life, 8 months of pretending to be someone else, could wait. Today was about Marcus and the community that had embraced them as family. "You're right," he said, pulling his wife close and kissing her forehead. Maya smelled like the vanilla perfume she'd worn since their college days, back when life was simpler, and James's biggest worry was passing his criminology finals. "Today I'm just Dad." But even as the words left his mouth, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. In 8 months of living in this community, building relationships and gathering evidence against Baltimore's most corrupt police unit, he'd developed an almost supernatural sense for danger. The hair on the back of his neck stood up for no reason he could identify. Marcus tugged on his father's hand, pulling him toward the group of children who were begging to start the treasure hunt James had planned. He'd hidden Spider-Man stickers and small toys around the pavilion, creating a map that would keep the kids entertained for at least an hour while the adults relaxed and enjoyed each other's company. As they walked across the grass, James's phone buzzed with a text message. Without thinking, he glanced at the screen and his blood turned to ice. It was from his FBI handler. "Mitchell's unit just received a dispatch to your location. Anonymous noise complaint filed 20 minutes ago. This wasn't random. Your cover may be blown. Abort if necessary." James's training kicked in immediately. He looked around the peaceful birthday celebration, children laughing as they searched for hidden treasures, parents chatting about school events and neighborhood concerns, his wife lighting candles on their son's chocolate cake decorated with Spider-Man's web pattern, and realized with crystalline clarity that they'd been set up. Someone in the Baltimore Police Department knew exactly who he was and where to find him. The question was whether it was Mitchell herself or someone higher up the corruption chain. His cover was blown, but his family was here, surrounded by innocent people who trusted him to keep them safe. People who had no idea that the man they'd welcomed into their community was a federal agent whose investigation could send dozens of cops to prison. The sound of police sirens in the distance made his decision for him. James slipped the phone back into his pocket and walked calmly toward his son, his face betraying nothing of the federal storm about to descend on their perfect afternoon. "Marcus?" he called, his voice steady despite the chaos building in his chest. "Come here, buddy." But before he could reach his son, 3 police cars rounded the corner and entered the park with unmistakable aggressive intent. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell had arrived to destroy everything they'd built. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell stepped out of her patrol car like a predator who'd cornered her prey. Her boots hit the asphalt with deliberate force, each step calculated to announce her authority. Officers Barnes and Cruz flanked her, their hands resting on their weapons despite facing a children's birthday party. The 3 moved across the park with the swagger of men who'd never faced real consequences for their actions. "Well, well, well. Look what we have here," Mitchell announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet pavilion. Parents instinctively pulled their children closer as the officers approached. "Anonymous complaint about noise violations and illegal gathering? Funny how you people always seem to think the rules don't apply." She surveyed the birthday celebration with theatrical disgust, her lip curling as she took in the decorations, the food, the families who'd been laughing moments before. "This whole setup reeks of welfare fraud. Who's paying for all this food? Hard-working taxpayers, I bet." Mrs. Washington, 73 years old and a retired school teacher who'd devoted 40 years to educating Baltimore's children, stood up slowly from her folding chair. "Officer, this is just a child's birthday party. We have every right to be here." Mitchell's eyes locked onto the elderly woman with predatory satisfaction. Did I ask you to speak, Grandma? Sit your welfare ass back down before you get yourself in trouble. The casual cruelty in her voice made several parents gasp audibly. James felt his jaw clench involuntarily, but he forced himself to remain motionless near the gift table. 8 months of surveillance had prepared him for Mitchell's racism, but hearing it directed at people he'd grown to care about felt like physical blows. Officer Barnes moved toward the food tables with obvious intent. Looks like a health code violation to me, Lieutenant. All this uncovered food sitting out in the heat could be dangerous. You're absolutely right, Barnes. Public safety hazard. Mitchell nodded toward the carefully arranged buffet that Maya and the other mothers had spent hours preparing. Better dispose of it properly. Barnes swept his arm across the main table, sending potato salad, fried chicken, and homemade sides crashing to the ground in a disgusting mess. Children started crying as their birthday feast became garbage scattered across the concrete. Maya's beautiful Spider-Man cake, decorated with loving detail the night before, hit the pavement with a wet splat. Oops, Barnes said with a cruel grin. Accidents happen when you don't follow proper food safety protocols. Cruz joined in the destruction, flipping over the gift table. Wrapped presents exploded across the grass, their colorful paper tearing as toys spilled out. Marcus's new soccer ball rolled toward the parking lot, followed by art supplies and books that had been chosen with careful thought by relatives who could barely afford them. This is what happens when Section 8 people try to have nice things, Mitchell announced to the gathered families. Reality has a way of reminding you where you belong in society. James stood frozen, watching his son's special day being systematically destroyed. Every instinct screamed at him to reveal his badge, to end this humiliation with federal authority, but his training held him back. Blowing his cover now would compromise 8 months of investigation and potentially let the entire corruption network escape justice. Maya appeared at his side, her hand finding his arm. She could feel the tension radiating from his body, the barely controlled rage that came from watching innocent people suffer. "James," she whispered urgently, "don't. Think about Marcus." But Mitchell had noticed James's stillness, his refusal to scatter like the other adults. She approached him with the focused attention of a shark sensing blood in the water. "You got something to say, boy?" she demanded, stopping inches from his face. "I noticed you standing there real quiet while everyone else is appropriately concerned about our presence. That makes me suspicious." James met her eyes without flinching, his voice carefully neutral. "Just trying to give my son a birthday party, officer. No trouble intended." "Your son?" Mitchell's smile turned vicious. "So you're the one responsible for this illegal gathering? The one teaching these children that they can ignore authority and do whatever they want?" She gestured broadly at the destroyed party, the crying children, the adults who were now filming with their phones despite knowing it might make things worse for them later. "Look at this mess. Look at what you've caused by thinking you could just take over public property without proper permits." Officer Cruz had moved behind James, a tactical positioning that wasn't lost on someone with federal training. They were trying to intimidate him, to make him react in a way that would justify escalation. "We have every right to use this public park," James replied evenly. "The pavilion was properly reserved through the city." Mitchell's laugh was harsh and mocking. "Reserved? By who? With what money? Let me guess. Another welfare scam where taxpayers foot the bill for your entertainment." She pulled out her citation book with theatrical slowness. "Unlawful assembly. Disturbing the peace. Failure to maintain proper food safety standards. Should I keep going, or are you ready to admit this whole thing was a mistake?" Barnes had found the small cooler where parents kept their personal items. He dumped it out roughly, sending purses, car keys, and cell phones spilling across the ground. "Searching for contraband," he announced. "These gatherings are always covered for drug activity." "That's illegal search without probable cause," called out Mr. Johnson, a man whose 2 jobs barely kept his family housed, but who'd never missed a community meeting. "Probable cause?" Cruz stepped toward Johnson aggressively. "Your attitude just gave me probable cause, smart mouth. You want to end up in handcuffs in front of your kids?" The systematic humiliation continued for another 10 minutes. Mitchell's unit moved through the gathered families like occupying soldiers, demanding identification, questioning legal status, treating American citizens like suspects in their own neighborhood. They made elderly women empty their purses. They questioned teenage boys about gang affiliations. They implied that any black man present was probably violating parole. James watched it all with growing fury, his hands clenched at his sides as Mitchell's unit practiced the exact kind of systematic racism he'd been documenting for 8 months. But this wasn't surveillance footage or recorded conversations. This was his community, his family, his son's birthday being destroyed by the very criminals he was supposed to bring to justice. The breaking point came when Mitchell turned her attention back to James with renewed interest. "You know what bothers me about you?" she said, circling him slowly. "You're too calm, too controlled. Most people get nervous around real authority, but you're just standing there like you think you're equal to me." She stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could smell her stale coffee breath. "Time to teach you some respect." Mitchell's predatory smile widened as she studied James's controlled composure. In 8 months of terrorizing this community, she'd learned to read fear in people's faces, to spot the exact moment when resistance crumbled into submission. But this man was different. His stillness felt dangerous rather than defeated, and that infuriated her. "What's wrong with you?" she demanded, stepping even closer. "Cat got your tongue, boy? I'm talking to you." James's training warred with his paternal instincts as he watched Mitchell's theatrical cruelty unfold. Every fiber of his being wanted to reveal his federal badge, to watch her arrogant smile collapse when she realized she'd just assaulted a federal agent's family. But 8 months of investigation hung in the balance. Dozens of corruption cases depended on his maintained cover. "I'm listening, officer," he replied carefully, his voice betraying nothing of the storm building inside him. "Listening?" Mitchell's laugh was sharp and mocking. "Your son's watching you be a coward right now. What kind of man are you? What kind of father lets this happen without saying a word?" She gestured broadly at the destroyed birthday party, the scattered presents, the crying children being comforted by their terrified parents. Marcus stood frozen near the ruined cake, chocolate frosting splattered across his Spider-Man shirt, his 8-year-old mind struggling to process why these adults were being so cruel. "I asked you a question, boy." Mitchell's voice rose to ensure everyone in the pavilion could hear. "Are you too stupid to answer when a real citizen addresses you?" Officer Barnes positioned himself behind James, while Cruz moved to flank him from the left. The tactical formation was designed to make him feel surrounded, vulnerable, powerless. It was a technique they'd perfected through years of intimidating innocent people. "Officer, I'm just trying to give my son a birthday party," James said, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. "We're not causing any trouble." "Not causing trouble?" Mitchell's voice dripped with theatrical disbelief. "You've taken over a public park without proper permits. You've created a health hazard with improperly stored food. You've disturbed the peace with excessive noise, and now you're showing disrespect to lawful authority." She pulled out her handcuffs, dangling them mockingly in front of James's face. "Maybe sometime in lockup we'll teach you about the proper way to address your betters." Maya stepped forward instinctively, her protective instincts overriding her fear. "Please, officers, there's no need for this. We'll clean up and leave quietly." Mitchell's eyes lit up with vicious pleasure as she turned toward Maya. "Did I ask you to speak, sweetheart? Seems like this whole family has problems with authority. Maybe you need to learn your place too." "Leave my wife alone," James said quietly, and something in his tone made Barnes's hand drift toward his weapon. "Or what?" Mitchell stepped back to James, close enough that her breath hit his face. "You'll do something about it? You think you're man enough to challenge real authority?" She looked around the pavilion at the gathered families, ensuring she had the maximum audience for what came next. Everyone watched this. This is what happens when people forget their place in society. Mitchell grabbed James by the shoulder and pushed him roughly toward his knees. "Down where you belong. Show everyone what you really are." The federal agent in James calculated odds, analyzed threats, and measured the tactical situation. But the father in him felt the eyes of his 8-year-old son watching this humiliation unfold. The community leader in him saw neighbors he'd grown to love witnessing his apparent powerlessness. He knelt slowly, his hands trembling with rage rather than fear. "That's better," Mitchell announced triumphantly. This is the natural order. Authority on top, criminals on their knees. She began a theatrical pat-down, her hands deliberately rough and invasive. When she reached his jacket pocket, her fingers found the leather case containing his FBI badge and credentials. Well, what do we have here? She pulled out the badge case with exaggerated curiosity. James's heart stopped. 8 months of carefully maintained cover was about to evaporate. Federal cases worth millions of dollars in prosecution were about to collapse. But Mitchell opened the case, glanced at the gold FBI shield, and laughed dismissively. "Look at this pathetic shit," she announced to her officers. "This fool has a fake FBI badge, probably bought it online to impress his welfare girlfriend." She tossed the badge case into the dirt next to the destroyed birthday cake, the genuine federal credentials landing in chocolate frosting and grass stains. "Fake police badge possession. That's another felony charge right there." Barnes and Cruz joined in her laughter. "Probably thinks he's in some kind of movie," Barnes said. "These people watch too much TV." "Maybe we should call the real FBI," Cruz suggested mockingly. "Report someone impersonating a federal agent. That's serious business." Mitchell ground her heel into the badge case, pressing James's authentic federal credentials deeper into the dirt. "Stop pretending to be somebody important. You're nothing but another unemployed baby daddy living off government handouts." Marcus had been watching this entire exchange with growing distress. His father, the strongest man in his world, was being forced to kneel in the dirt while strangers mocked and humiliated him. The 8-year-old couldn't understand the complexities of undercover work or federal investigations. He only knew that bad people were hurting his daddy. "Leave my daddy alone," Marcus suddenly shouted, running toward the group of officers. Maya caught him before he could reach them, wrapping her arms around her son as he struggled to break free. "Marcus, no! Stay with Mommy!" Mitchell's attention shifted to the crying child with renewed cruelty. "Control your little criminal or I'll do it for you," she threatened. Maybe some time in foster care would teach him proper respect for authority. "Don't you dare threaten my child," James said from his kneeling position, and this time there was no hiding the steel in his voice. "Threaten?" Mitchell's smile was pure malice. "I don't make threats, boy. I make promises. Your whole family is about to learn what happens when you disrespect the badge." She pulled out her radio with theatrical slowness. "Dispatch, this is Unit 23. I need child services for a welfare check. Suspected neglect and endangerment. Parents appear to be under the influence and creating unsafe environments for minors." The lie was so casual, so practiced, that James realized this was routine for her. How many families had she destroyed with false reports? How many children had been torn from their parents by her manufactured evidence? "You can't do that," Maya said desperately. "We haven't done anything wrong." "I can do whatever I want," Mitchell replied with absolute confidence. "I'm the law here, and the law says your family doesn't belong in a decent society." She keyed her radio again. "Also requesting backup for multiple arrests. Disorderly conduct, resisting authority, impersonating a federal officer, and whatever else I decide to charge them with." James remained on his knees in the dirt, his genuine FBI badge ground into the earth beside him, his son crying in his wife's arms, his community watching in horrified silence. The corrupt lieutenant who'd spent 8 months destroying innocent lives had no idea she was about to face the full weight of federal justice. But not yet. Not until his family was safe and these good people were protected from retaliation. For now, James Thompson knelt in the dirt and let Sarah Mitchell believe she held all the power. The sound of additional sirens filled the air as Mitchell's backup arrived. 2 more patrol cars pulled into the park, disgorging officers who approached the pavilion with the casual confidence of predators who'd never faced real consequences. The birthday celebration had devolved into a scene of systematic terrorization, with families huddled together while their children watched authority figures destroy everything they'd worked to create. "Shut this whole thing down," Mitchell commanded her reinforcements. "Illegal assembly, health violations disturbing the peace. I want every adult identified and processed." Officer Barnes kicked over the remaining folding chairs with deliberate malice. "Should we tear down all these decorations too, Lieutenant? Looks like a fire hazard to me." "Absolutely. Public safety first." Mitchell's smile was predatory as she watched Barnes rip down streamers and stomp on balloons. The cheerful birthday decorations that James had hung with such care became colorful trash scattered across the grass. Cruz had found the cooler containing party favors and dumped it roughly, sending small toys and candy spilling across the concrete. "Contraband search," he announced with mock seriousness. "These gatherings are always covered for illegal activity." Mrs. Washington, still seated despite Mitchell's earlier commands, spoke with the dignity of someone who'd survived decades of institutional racism. "You have no right to do this. This is a legal gathering in a public space." "Right?" Mitchell whirled on the elderly woman with renewed viciousness. "You think you have rights? You think your welfare benefits come with constitutional protections?" She approached Mrs. Washington's folding chair with deliberate intimidation. "Stand up when I'm talking to you, Grandma. Show some respect for real authority." "She has arthritis," Maya said desperately, still holding Marcus tight against her chest. "She can barely stand without help." "Did I ask for your medical opinion?" Mitchell's voice rose to a shout that made several children start crying again. "I said stand up, now!" Mrs. Washington struggled to her feet, her arthritic joints protesting audibly. The dignity in her movement, the refusal to be broken despite obvious pain, made the cruelty even more stark. She stood straight-backed and proud, meeting Mitchell's glare without flinching. "That's better," Mitchell said with satisfaction. "See how much more civilized things are when everyone knows their place?" The new officers had begun systematically destroying everything that remained of the birthday party. They overturned the gift table completely, grinding wrapped presents into the dirt. One officer found Marcus's new bicycle, a surprise gift that James and Maya had saved for months to afford, and kicked it hard enough to bend the front wheel. "Abandoned property," he announced, "creating a public hazard." James watched from his kneeling position as his son's birthday dreams were systematically destroyed. The surveillance photos in his phone documented Mitchell taking drug money. The recorded conversations proved her racist conspiracy. 8 months of federal investigation could send her to prison for decades, but none of that mattered while she terrorized his family and community. "You know what I think?" Mitchell said, walking back to where James knelt in the dirt with his FBI badge ground into chocolate frosting beside him. "I think you're not showing proper remorse for your illegal activities." She gestured broadly at the destroyed party. "All this could have been avoided if you'd just followed the law, but you people always think the rules don't apply." Officer Barnes had moved behind Marcus and Maya, close enough to make them uncomfortable but not quite close enough to justify complaint. "The kid's got some mouth on him," he said loudly. "I've been talking back to authority all afternoon. Maybe some time away from bad influences would set him straight." The threat was clear and calculated. Maya's grip on her son tightened instinctively, her protective instincts flaring. "You stay away from my child!" "Or what?" Cruz stepped closer to the mother and son. "You'll file a complaint? Call a lawyer? Who do you think they're going to believe? Upstanding police officers or welfare criminals?" Mitchell pulled out her handcuffs again, dangling them in front of James's face as he knelt motionless in the dirt. "I'm thinking of obstruction of justice, resisting arrest, impersonating a federal officer. That's enough for 5 years minimum, wouldn't you say, Barnes?" "At least 5 years," Barnes agreed with obvious pleasure. "Federal prison time for fake badge possession. They don't like cop impersonators there." "Please," Maya said desperately, "just let us clean up and go home. We'll never come back to this park." "Just please leave us alone." "Too late for that," Mitchell replied with cruel satisfaction. "Your husband decided to challenge my authority. Now everyone gets to watch what happens to people who don't know their place." She grabbed James roughly by the arm, hauling him to his feet only to shove him back down harder. His knees hit the concrete with enough force to tear his jeans, but his face remained impassive. 8 years of marriage had taught Maya to read her husband's micro-expressions, and what she saw terrified her more than the corrupt officers. James was calculating, planning, preparing for something that would change everything. "James," she said urgently, recognizing the dangerous stillness that preceded action. "Don't. Think about Marcus. Think about the consequences." But Mitchell had decided to escalate beyond mere humiliation. She grabbed Marcus roughly by the arm, pulling the 8-year-old away from his mother despite his frightened crying. Maybe sometime in the system will teach this little criminal proper respect, she announced loudly enough for everyone to hear. Child Services loves cases like this. Neglectful parents, inappropriate environment, clear evidence of criminal influence. Marcus struggled against her grip, tears streaming down his face as he looked desperately toward his father. "Daddy, help me! Make her let go!" The sound of his son's terrified voice shattered the last of James's restraint. Federal protocols, undercover operational security, 8 months of careful investigation, all of it evaporated in the face of a corrupt cop threatening his child. James rose from his kneeling position with fluid grace, his movements suddenly precise and controlled in a way that made Barnes step backward instinctively. The mild-mannered community member disappeared, replaced by someone whose presence radiated barely contained violence. "Take your hands off my son," he said quietly, but his voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mitchell's cruel smile faltered slightly at his tone, but her grip on Marcus tightened. "What did you just say to me?" "I said, take your hands off my son." James's voice was steel wrapped in ice. "Right now." "Or what?" Mitchell's bravado was starting to crack, but she doubled down on aggression. "You'll assault a police officer in front of all these witnesses?" James reached into his jacket pocket with deliberate calm, his movements precise enough to make the other officers tense, but instead of pulling out a weapon, he withdrew his cell phone. "No," he said, maintaining eye contact with Mitchell while speed-dialing a number he knew by heart. "I'm going to make a phone call." Mitchell's laughter was harsh and mocking. "A phone call? To who? Your lawyer? Your mommy? Some civil rights organization that'll file a complaint in 6 months?" The phone connected after one ring. "This is Special Agent James Thompson, badge number 2847, he said clearly, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent pavilion. "I need immediate federal backup at Druid Hill Park, Baltimore. My cover has been compromised and my family is under threat from corrupt Baltimore PD officers." The effect was instantaneous and devastating. Mitchell's grip on Marcus loosened as confusion and disbelief warred across her face. Barnes and Cruz exchanged uncertain glances, their predatory confidence evaporating. "Federal investigation of Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell's narcotics conspiracy has been ongoing for 8 months. James continued into the phone, his eyes never leaving Mitchell's face. "I have documented evidence of civil rights violations, drug trafficking, and systematic corruption. Request immediate arrest and federal charges." Mitchell's face cycled through disbelief, rage, and the first flicker of genuine fear. "You're lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "That's a fake badge. You're just some welfare rat trying to sound important." James pocketed his phone and bent down to retrieve his FBI credentials from the dirt. He wiped chocolate frosting from the gold shield and held it up for everyone to see. 8 months, he said conversationally. 8 months of watching you terrorize innocent families. 8 months of documenting your crimes. 8 months of waiting for you to give me enough evidence to put your entire corrupt unit in federal prison. The sound of helicopters approaching made Mitchell's face go pale. "That would be my backup arriving," James said calmly. "I suggest you release my son and step away from my family." But Mitchell, desperate and cornered, made one final catastrophic mistake. Instead of releasing Marcus, she pulled the terrified child closer, her hand moving toward her service weapon. "Nobody's going anywhere until I figure out what's really happening here," she snarled. The helicopters were getting closer, and James's smile was cold as winter steel. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell," he said with absolute authority, "you are under arrest." The sound of FBI helicopters filled the air like mechanical thunder, drowning out the children's crying and the adults' shocked whispers. Mitchell's face drained of color as she looked up at the aircraft circling overhead, her cruel confidence crumbling into something approaching panic. "You're lying," she repeated desperately, but her voice cracked with uncertainty. "This is some kind of setup, some kind of trick." James straightened to his full height, and suddenly everything about his posture changed. Gone was the submissive community member who'd knelt in the dirt. In his place stood a federal agent with 15 years of experience bringing down criminals exactly like Sarah Mitchell. "Lieutenant Mitchell, badge number 4471, 23 years of service with Baltimore PD," he said conversationally, as if reciting her morning coffee order. Currently assigned to the Eastern District, living at 2847 Oakwood Drive with your estranged wife Patricia and daughter Jessica, who just started her sophomore year at Towson University. Mitchell's grip on Marcus loosened involuntarily as shock registered across her face. "How do you know that?" 8 months of federal surveillance, James replied calmly, including recorded conversations where you called this community animals that need controlling, wire recordings of you coordinating with drug dealer Marcus Williams to protect his territory in exchange for monthly payments, financial records showing $200,000 in unexplained income over the past 3 years. Barnes and Cruz had gone completely silent, their earlier bravado replaced by the dawning realization that they'd just destroyed a federal agent's son's birthday party while dozens of witnesses recorded everything. "Sir," Barnes said tentatively, his voice small and uncertain, "we didn't know. We were just following orders." James's eyes never left Mitchell's face as he responded. "The same excuse you've used for 8 months of systematically terrorizing this community. The same excuse you used when you planted drugs on 16-year-old Kevin Johnson last month. The same excuse you used when you took $40,000 from the Rodriguez family's house and claimed it was drug proceeds." The helicopters were directly overhead now, their rotors whipping debris across the destroyed birthday party. FBI tactical agents fast-roped down into the park with military precision, their black uniforms and automatic weapons creating a stark contrast to the colorful birthday decorations scattered across the grass. "FBI! Nobody move!" Agent Sarah Carter, James's handler for the past 8 months, approached the pavilion with her weapon drawn but lowered. She'd been coordinating this investigation from the beginning, watching through surveillance cameras as her best undercover agent built a case that would dismantle the most corrupt police unit in Baltimore's history. "Agent Thompson," she called out formally, establishing his authority for everyone present. "Status report. Lieutenant Mitchell and her unit just committed multiple federal crimes in front of approximately 30 witnesses," James replied, his voice carrying the calm professionalism of someone delivering a case summary. "Civil rights violations, intimidation of a federal officer, destruction of property, and threats against a minor. All of it recorded on multiple cell phones." Mitchell finally released Marcus completely, the terrified child running to his mother's arms as FBI agents surrounded the corrupt officers. Her face had gone from pale to gray as the full scope of her situation became clear. "This is impossible," she whispered. "You can't be FBI. You live here. You work construction. I've seen you at community meetings." "Special Agent James Thompson," he said, pulling out his credentials again and holding them where everyone could see. "Federal Bureau of Investigation Public Corruption Unit, assigned to investigate systematic civil rights violations and drug-related corruption within the Baltimore Police Department." Agent Carter moved to Mitchell's side with handcuffs ready. "Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, you're under arrest for violation of federal civil rights statutes, conspiracy to distribute controlled substances, extortion, and intimidation of a federal officer." "Wait," Mitchell said desperately, looking around at the gathered families who were now recording her arrest with obvious satisfaction. "This has to be entrapment. He was pretending to be someone else. That's illegal. Undercover operations are completely legal when investigating ongoing criminal conspiracies," James replied matter-of-factly, "especially when those conspiracies involve systematic violation of citizens' constitutional rights." Officer Barnes tried to back away slowly but found himself surrounded by federal agents. "I want to cooperate," he said quickly. "I was just following Lieutenant Mitchell's orders. I have information about other officers involved." "Officer Richard Barnes," Agent Carter announced, producing another set of handcuffs. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy and civil rights violations. You'll have plenty of opportunities to cooperate from federal custody." Cruz had gone completely silent, staring at James with something approaching awe. 8 months of casual racism, 8 months of treating him like a second-class citizen, 8 months of systematic cruelty, all directed at a federal agent who'd been documenting every word, every action, every crime. "The fake badge," Cruz said numbly. "The one you threw in the dirt. That was real." James bent down and picked up his credentials again, wiping away the last of the chocolate frosting. "Special Agent James Thompson, badge 2847. The same badge you spent 10 minutes mocking while you destroyed a child's birthday party." The arrest process was swift and efficient. Federal agents read Miranda rights while community members continued recording, ensuring that every moment of Mitchell's humiliation was documented just as thoroughly as their own had been. The woman who'd spent years terrorizing innocent families now faced the cameras herself, handcuffed and heading toward federal prosecution. "You have the right to remain silent," Agent Carter recited as she secured the handcuffs. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Mitchell's last act of defiance was to spit on the ground near James's feet. "This isn't over," she snarled. "You think one arrest is going to change anything? There are dozens of us. The whole system protects cops, not criminals like you." James looked down at her with something approaching pity. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you don't understand. This isn't one arrest. This is the beginning of the largest police corruption prosecution in Maryland history." He pulled out his phone and showed her the screen displaying dozens of surveillance photos, audio recordings, and financial documents. 34 officers are being arrested simultaneously across the city right now. Your entire network is finished. As the federal agents led Mitchell and her unit away in handcuffs, the destroyed birthday party fell into absolute silence. Community members who'd been terrorized by these officers for years watched their tormentors face justice at last. Marcus tugged on his father's hand, looking up with 8-year-old confusion. "Daddy, are you really a policeman?" James knelt down to his son's level, finally able to be completely honest. "I'm an FBI agent, buddy, and my job is to catch bad policemen who hurt good people." The sound of news helicopters joining the FBI aircraft overhead signaled that this story was about to become much bigger than a destroyed birthday party. Everything was about to change. Within 15 minutes of Mitchell's arrest, the first video appeared on social media. Mrs. Washington's granddaughter had been live streaming the birthday party when the police arrived, and her phone had captured every moment of escalating cruelty, followed by the stunning federal intervention. The video, titled "Racist Cop Destroys Kid's Birthday Then Gets Arrested by FBI," began accumulating views at an exponential rate. Maya sat in the back of an FBI vehicle with Marcus, watching her phone screen as the notification numbers climbed. 50,000 views, 100,000, 200,000. The hashtag #KnowYourPlace was trending nationwide, turning Mitchell's most vicious command back against her with devastating irony. "Look at this," Maya said to James, who was giving his official statement to Agent Carter nearby. "Someone already made a compilation of everything she said. The whole thing is going viral." The edited video was brutal in its efficiency. It opened with Mitchell's arrival. "Look at these welfare rats pretending they belong here." Cut to her destroying the birthday cake. Cut to her forcing James to his knees. Cut to her threatening Marcus. Then the sudden reversal. James's phone call, the FBI credentials, Mitchell's face going pale as helicopters filled the sky. The comment section was savage and immediate. "That face when she realizes she just arrested an FBI agent, LMAO. How you gonna call someone boy and then get handcuffed by that same person? Know your place, Mitchell. Your place is a prison." This is the most satisfying video on the entire internet. Someone needs to make this into a movie ASAP. The way she threw that real FBI badge in the dirt, I'm deceased. But the viral explosion wasn't limited to celebration. Within an hour, opposing hashtags began trending. Hashback the Blue supporters rallied around claims of entrapment and federal overreach. Conservative media personalities shared carefully edited clips that removed context, showing only the arrest without the preceding harassment. "Federal agents infiltrating local communities to trap hard-working police officers," read one viral tweet with 50,000 retweets. "This is what happens when the deep state targets law enforcement patriots." The digital battlefield intensified as more footage emerged. Security cameras from nearby businesses captured angles that cell phones had missed. A local barbershop surveillance system showed the entire incident from start to finish, including clear audio of every racist slur Mitchell had used. The barbershop owner, a community fixture for 30 years, released the footage with a simple caption, "This is what we deal with every day." James watched the digital battle unfold with professional interest as he finished his statement. 8 months of undercover work had prepared him for the investigation and prosecution phases, but the social media war was something entirely new. His family's trauma was becoming content. Their pain transformed into political ammunition for both sides. TikTok users began creating response videos faster than news outlets could report the story. A Baltimore teenager posted a video titled POV, "You called someone boy, but they're actually FBI," that garnered 3 million views in 6 hours. Dance challenges emerged around audio clips of James revealing his identity. The story had transcended news and become a cultural phenomenon. The Baltimore Police Department issued a statement within 2 hours. The officers involved were acting within established protocols for noise complaints and public safety concerns. The department will cooperate fully with any federal investigation while maintaining that our officers acted appropriately given the information available to them. The statement sparked immediate backlash. Community leaders who'd suffered under Mitchell's unit for years began sharing their own stories with receipts. Baltimore corruption exploded with testimonials, photographs, and documentation of years of systematic abuse. Mitchell's unit destroyed my nephew's graduation party last year, called it a gang gathering. "He's valedictorian at Johns Hopkins now," read one viral tweet with accompanying photos of the young man in his cap and gown alongside police body camera footage from that incident. "They stole $3,000 from my mother's purse during a traffic stop. Said it was drug money. It was her rent money. We have the body cam footage and the receipts," shared another user, posting a thread that included lawsuit documents, bank statements, and police reports. Mitchell called my church's youth barbecue a criminal gathering. These kids were raising money for college scholarships. Thread 147th began a pastor's detailed account with photographic evidence spanning 2 years of harassment. 8 months this FBI agent lived in our community. 8 months he protected us without us knowing. 8 months he ate at our tables and played with our kids while building a case for justice. That's a hero, wrote Mrs. Washington's granddaughter, whose original live stream had now been viewed over 4 million times. But the most damaging content came from unexpected sources. Anonymous leakers within the Baltimore Police Department began releasing internal documents. Mitchell's police personnel file revealed 17 previous complaints for excessive force and racial profiling, all dismissed or buried by internal affairs. Audio recordings surfaced of her using racial slurs during shift briefings, calling community events breeding grounds for future criminals. Financial records appeared showing luxury purchases that exceeded her police salary by hundreds of thousands of dollars. A $80,000 boat, a vacation home in Ocean City, designer handbags worth more than most community members' monthly rent. All purchased while claiming her mission was protecting tax-paying citizens from criminal elements. The revelation that Mitchell lived in luxury while terrorizing families struggling to afford birthday parties struck a particularly raw nerve. Someone created a split-screen comparison showing Mitchell's boat alongside Marcus's destroyed birthday cake. It became one of the most shared images of the entire incident. The Baltimore Police Union called an emergency press conference within 6 hours of the arrest. Union President Robert Hayes, a 30-year veteran with his own history of controversial statements, faced a hostile crowd of reporters and community activists outside police headquarters. "These officers were doing their jobs," Hayes declared, sweat visible on his forehead despite the evening's cool temperature. "They responded to a legitimate noise complaint and followed standard protocols. The fact that one individual happened to be a federal agent doesn't change the validity of their actions." "What about the racial slurs?" shouted a reporter from the Baltimore Sun. "What about destroying a child's birthday cake and calling community members welfare rats?" "I haven't seen any verified evidence of inappropriate language," Hayes replied, even as videos of Mitchell's racist tirade played on screens behind him carried by protesters. "But I will say that police officers work in high-stress situations where split-second decisions are required." The press conference descended into chaos when Keisha Washington, Mrs. Washington's granddaughter who'd live-streamed the original incident, stood up in the audience with her phone connected to a portable speaker. "I have a question," she called out clearly. "Would you like to watch the video of your officers calling an 8-year-old boy's birthday party a ghetto circus and making his federal agent father kneel in the dirt like a criminal?" Before Hayes could respond, she'd begun playing the footage at maximum volume. Mitchell's voice filled the conference area. "Shut down this ghetto circus before these animals breed more criminals." The Union president's face went ashen as he realized every news camera in the area was capturing his reaction to evidence he'd just claimed didn't exist. Behind him, protesters held up their phones showing the same footage, creating a wall of screens displaying his officers' crimes. We'll have to review all available footage before making any further statements, he stammered. You just said there was no evidence, pressed another reporter. Are you changing your position now that we've all watched a federal agent being forced to his knees at his son's birthday party? The social media response was immediate and merciless. #Police Union Lies began trending as clips of Hayes denying evidence while that evidence played behind him spread across platforms. Someone created a GIF of his face changing expressions as he realized he'd been caught in an obvious lie. Within hours, calls for his resignation joined the digital chorus demanding accountability. Meanwhile, the FBI had released their own carefully crafted statement. Special Agent Thompson's 8-month investigation has resulted in federal charges against 34 Baltimore Police Department officers for civil rights violations, drug trafficking conspiracy, and systematic corruption. This investigation represents one of the largest police corruption cases in Maryland history. The scope revelation sent shockwaves through both traditional and social media. 34 officers, 8 months of documentation, systematic corruption reaching into every level of the department. The birthday party incident wasn't an isolated case of racist policing. It was the tip of an iceberg that threatened to sink the entire Baltimore Police Department. International media picked up the story within hours. BBC News ran a segment titled "American Police Corruption Exposed at Child's Birthday Party." Deutsche Welle featured it as evidence of systematic racism in U.S. law enforcement. The image of a federal agent kneeling in dirt while corrupt officers mocked his credentials became a global symbol of institutional failure. By evening, protesters had gathered outside police headquarters. The crowd included community members who'd suffered under corrupt officers alongside suburban supporters who'd driven in after watching the viral videos. Signs reading, "Know Your Place," "Prison," and "FBI Agent Daddy" competed with smaller groups of counter-protesters holding "Back the Blue" banners. The generational divide was stark. Older community members who'd endured decades of police harassment wept openly as they watched Mitchell led away in handcuffs. Younger activists live-streamed the protests while creating new content mocking the arrested officers. Children who'd been at the birthday party drew pictures of FBI helicopters and gave interviews to reporters about their secret agent neighbor. National media had transformed the story into prime-time content by evening. Cable news shows featured split screens showing the viral arrest footage alongside expert panels debating police accountability, federal oversight, and the ethics of undercover operations in communities of color. James found himself transformed overnight from anonymous community member to symbol of justice, his carefully maintained cover blown in the most spectacular way possible. "The impact goes far beyond Baltimore," announced CNN's legal analyst during the evening broadcast. This case demonstrates how federal law enforcement can successfully infiltrate and document systematic police corruption. It's a model that could be replicated in departments across the country. But Fox News framed the story differently. Federal agents living undercover in American communities for months, secretly recording law-abiding citizens and entrapping local police officers. Is this the kind of surveillance state we want in America? The political divide played out in real time across social media platforms. Liberal activists shared compilation videos of Mitchell's racist statements with captions celebrating her downfall. Conservative users shared carefully edited footage focusing on James's concealed identity, framing him as a deceptive federal agent who'd violated community trust. Lost in the political noise was the human story at the center. An 8-year-old boy whose birthday party had been destroyed by corrupt officers, and a father who'd spent 8 months building genuine relationships in a community while knowing he'd eventually have to break some hearts when his true identity was revealed. Maya watched the digital storm from the safety of an FBI safe house, where her family had been moved for their protection. "Look at this," she said, showing James her phone screen. "People are calling you the birthday party FBI agent. Someone made a meme out of your arrest speech." The meme showed James holding his badge with the caption, "Special Agent James Thompson, badge number 2,847 inches," over a background of birthday cake and FBI helicopters. It has been shared over 2 million times with variations in dozens of languages. I never wanted to be famous, James said quietly, watching his son play with FBI agents who'd volunteered to entertain him, while the adults processed the aftermath of their destroyed normal life. I just wanted to catch the bad guys and go home to my family. Well, Maya replied, scrolling through hundreds of messages from community members expressing support, gratitude, and love for their secret protector. Looks like you did a lot more than that. You gave people hope. 3 days after the viral arrest, FBI Special Agent Sarah Carter stood before the largest evidence board she'd ever assembled. The conference room at the Baltimore FBI field office looked like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream, with a red string connecting photographs, financial documents, audio transcripts, and surveillance footage across 4 massive whiteboards. 8 months of James Thompson's undercover work had produced a paper trail that threatened to topple the entire Baltimore Police Department power structure. 34 officers, Carter announced to the assembled federal prosecutors, civil rights attorneys, and Justice Department officials who'd flown in from Washington. 34 sworn law enforcement officers participating in what can only be described as an organized criminal enterprise operating under the color of law. She clicked to the first slide of her presentation. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell's photograph appeared alongside a financial analysis that made several prosecutors whistle in amazement. Mitchell alone received over $200,000 in drug proceeds over 3 years. But she wasn't at the top of the pyramid. She was middle management in a corruption network that reaches to the deputy chief level. Agent Rodriguez, James's technical support specialist for the investigation, activated a sophisticated audio system. We have 8 months of recorded conversations thanks to Agent Thompson's willingness to wear a wire to community meetings, barbecues, church services, and informal gatherings where these officers believed they could speak freely. The first recording began playing, crystal clear despite being captured at a noisy block party 3 months earlier. Mitchell's voice filled the room with casual racism that made several attorneys shift uncomfortably in their seats. These animals need to be reminded who runs this city. Every gathering is a potential riot waiting to happen. Better to shut them down before they get ideas about organizing. That recording was captured at a community cookout celebrating a local teenager's acceptance to Morgan State University, Carter explained. Agent Thompson attended as a supportive neighbor while documenting systematic planning to disrupt legitimate community events. U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams leaned forward with intense interest. What's the scope of community targeting? How many events were disrupted? Rodriguez consulted his tablet before responding. 47 documented incidents over 8 months. Birthday parties, graduation celebrations, church fundraisers, youth sports events. The pattern shows deliberate targeting of positive community gatherings that could build social cohesion. The next audio clip was even more damaging. Deputy Chief Robert Morrison's voice, recorded during a private meeting with Mitchell at a downtown restaurant, revealed the true scope of the conspiracy. The federal heat is getting stronger. These civil rights groups are filing too many complaints. We need to be smarter about how we handle community relations. Make sure any incidents look justified on paper. And if they resist? Mitchell's voice asked. Then we make them disappear into the system, process them through the courts, burden them with legal fees they can't afford, make examples that keep the others in line. Fear is more effective than bullets. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't rogue policing or individual racism. This was systematic oppression designed and implemented at the highest levels of law enforcement. FBI Financial Crimes Specialist Amanda Foster took over the presentation, displaying bank records that painted a picture of corruption almost too extensive to believe. The drug money didn't just go to individual officers. A percentage was laundered through police union accounts and used to fund political campaigns for judges and prosecutors who would be sympathetic to police testimony. They were buying the entire justice system? Asked Justice Department Civil Rights Division Attorney Michael Chang. Specifically, they were ensuring that any community member who filed complaints against police would face hostile prosecutors and skeptical judges, Foster confirmed. We've identified at least 6 local judges who received campaign contributions directly linked to drug proceeds. The corruption network includes law enforcement, judicial, and political elements. Chen clicked on surveillance photographs taken during James's investigation. The images showed Mitchell and other officers meeting with known drug dealers, exchanging envelopes, coordinating territory divisions like corporate executives discussing market share. Agent Thompson documented regular meetings between police and drug distribution networks. The officers weren't just taking bribes, they were active partners in drug trafficking, using their badges to eliminate competition and protect preferred dealers. One photograph showed Mitchell shaking hands with Marcus Williams, a known heroin dealer, outside a warehouse that served as a distribution hub. Both were smiling like old friends conducting routine business. The Williams organization paid police protection fees of $15,000 monthly in exchange for advance warning about raids, elimination of competing dealers, and protection during large shipments, Rodriguez explained. We have recorded conversations detailing these arrangements going back 3 years. The most disturbing evidence came next. Carter displayed internal police communications that revealed systematic targeting of community leaders who might organize resistance to police practices. They maintain target lists, she said grimly. Community organizers, church leaders, parent activists, anyone who showed potential for mobilizing neighborhood resistance. These individuals were subjected to increased harassment, false arrests, and systematic intimidation. James Thompson's name appeared on one of these lists, marked with a red flag indicating federal interest. Monitor closely. The notation was dated 6 months before his arrest, proving that someone in the department suspected his true identity long before the birthday party incident. Agent Thompson was operating under blown cover for months without knowing it, Carter revealed. They were testing him, escalating harassment to see how he'd respond. The birthday party wasn't random. It was a deliberate attempt to force him into a position where he'd have to reveal himself or watch his family suffer. U.S. Attorney Williams studied the evidence with growing amazement. This is RICO territory. We're not just looking at individual crimes. This is an ongoing criminal enterprise using police powers to facilitate drug trafficking while terrorizing communities that might resist. Exactly, Carter confirmed. We're preparing federal racketeering charges alongside the civil rights violations. This case could result in federal prison sentences of 20 to 30 years for the top conspirators. But the investigation had revealed something even more disturbing. Financial analysis showed that the corruption network extended beyond Baltimore's borders, connecting to similar operations in 3 other Maryland jurisdictions. They were franchising their model, Foster explained, teaching other departments how to establish protection relationships with drug dealers while maintaining plausible deniability. We've identified at least 40 additional officers in surrounding counties who received training in what they called community management techniques. Agent Thompson entered the conference room for the first time since his cover was blown, still looking exhausted from 3 days of nonstop debriefings. His 8-month performance had been so convincing that several community members initially refused to believe he was federal law enforcement, insisting he was just a construction worker who'd been framed. The personal cost has been significant, he told the assembled officials. My son asks why I lied to him about my job. My neighbors feel betrayed that I was secretly recording conversations. People who trusted me with their deepest fears about police harassment now wonder if I was gathering information to use against them. But they also understand why it was necessary, Carter added. Community leaders have been calling our office to thank Agent Thompson for 8 months of genuine protection while he built this case. Thompson pulled out his phone and played a voicemail that had come in that morning. Mrs. Washington's voice, aged but strong, filled the conference room. James, this is Mrs. Washington. I want you to know that every Sunday you sat in our church, every time you helped fix my porch steps, every conversation we had about keeping our children safe. All of that was real. The job was pretend, but the man was real, and that man is a hero to this community. Several attorneys had to clear their throats after the recording ended. The human cost of undercover work was often discussed in abstract terms, but hearing the genuine affection and forgiveness in an elderly woman's voice made it tangible. The evidence package includes over 2,000 hours of audio recordings, 15,000 photographs, complete financial records for all 34 officers, and testimony from 47 community members who've agreed to testify about systematic harassment. Rodriguez summarized. Most importantly, Carter added, we have real-time documentation of civil rights violations that would normally be impossible to prove. Agent Thompson's presence in the community for 8 months means we can show pattern and practice, not just isolated incidents. The recorded conversations were particularly damaging because they captured officers speaking freely about their contempt for the communities they were sworn to protect. One audio clip from a restaurant meeting showed Mitchell and 3 other officers discussing community events with language that would make prosecution straightforward. These people breed like rabbits and expect taxpayers to fund their celebrations, Mitchell's voice said clearly. Better to shut down their gatherings before they start organizing politically. Keep them scared, keep them separated, keep them focused on survival instead of resistance. That's a textbook civil rights conspiracy, noted Justice Department Attorney Chang. They're explicitly discussing using police power to suppress First Amendment activities. But perhaps the most damaging evidence was financial. The corruption network had generated over $8 million in drug-related income over 5 years, with proceeds distributed through a sophisticated money laundering operation that included police union accounts, political action committees, and legitimate businesses owned by officers' family members. They weren't just taking bribes, Foster explained. They were running a comprehensive criminal enterprise that happened to use police badges as operational cover. The scope of community damage was equally staggering. Carter displayed statistics that painted a picture of systematic oppression designed to destroy social cohesion in predominantly black neighborhoods. 47 community events disrupted over 8 months. 138 false arrests of community leaders over 3 years. Over $300,000 in legal fees imposed on families fighting wrongful arrests. This was ethnic cleansing disguised as law enforcement. Thompson spoke quietly from his position near the evidence boards. Every conversation I recorded, every photograph I took, every financial transaction I documented, it all happened because these officers believed they were untouchable. They thought their badges made them immune to consequences. That confidence came from institutional protection, Carter noted. Internal Affairs dismissed 93% of complaints against these officers. The police union defended even the most obviously criminal behavior. District attorneys routinely accepted police testimony without question, even when contradicted by physical evidence. U.S. Attorney Williams stood up to address the room. This investigation represents exactly why federal civil rights enforcement exists. When local systems are so corrupted that they cannot police themselves, federal intervention becomes necessary to protect constitutional rights. She gestured toward the overwhelming evidence that covered every available wall surface. We're not just prosecuting individual crimes. We're dismantling a criminal organization that used government power to terrorize American citizens while enriching themselves through drug trafficking. The birthday party incident that went viral was just one day in an 8-month documentation of systematic violations, she continued. But it was the day when one of their victims turned out to have federal authority to fight back. As the briefing concluded, agents began preparing arrest warrants for the remaining suspects. The initial 3 arrests at the park were just the beginning. Over the next 48 hours, federal agents would simultaneously arrest 31 additional Baltimore Police Department members in the largest corruption sweep in Maryland history. Thompson gathered his evidence files, preparing for another round of depositions and grand jury testimony. 8 months of undercover work was about to become years of prosecutorial work, ensuring that every officer who'd terrorized innocent families would face federal justice. Agent Thompson, U.S. Attorney Williams called as he prepared to leave. I want you to know that your sacrifice, your family's sacrifice, is going to save lives and restore constitutional rights for thousands of people. He looked back at the evidence boards covered with proof of systematic corruption and smiled grimly. Ma'am, that birthday party was supposed to be the end of my investigation. Turns out it was just the beginning of justice. 6 weeks after the viral birthday party arrest, federal prosecutors had assembled the most comprehensive police corruption case in Maryland history. The grand jury room in the Baltimore Federal Courthouse buzzed with tension as witnesses lined up to testify against the officers who'd terrorized their communities for years. But the most powerful testimony came from an unexpected source. Officer Luis Rodriguez, a 15-year Baltimore police veteran who'd finally found the courage to break his silence. Rodriguez sat across from U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams in a secure FBI interview room, his hands shaking as he opened a manila folder containing evidence he'd been secretly collecting for 2 years. His police career was over, his pension gone, his family receiving death threats from other officers, but his conscience could no longer bear the weight of complicity. "I couldn't watch what happened to that family," Rodriguez began, his voice barely above a whisper. "That little boy was crying over his birthday cake while Mitchell laughed about it. That federal agent was forced to kneel in dirt while she called him boy. I've got kids the same age." Williams activated the recording equipment as Rodriguez pulled out his first piece of evidence, a small digital recorder he'd been using to document internal police conversations for 24 months. "I started recording after Mitchell's unit beat up my nephew during a traffic stop," he explained. "Miguel was coming home from his job at the hospital. He's a respiratory therapist, saves lives every day, and they pulled him over for driving while black in his own neighborhood." The first audio file Rodriguez played was devastating in its casual cruelty. Mitchell's voice discussing community policing strategies with Deputy Chief Morrison sounded like military commanders planning occupation tactics. "We need to break their spirit before they organize," Mitchell's recorded voice said clearly. "Every birthday party, every graduation, every church event, these are opportunities to remind them who has real power. Fear keeps them compliant." Morrison's response was even more chilling. "The key is making it look random, individual officers responding to legitimate complaints. No patterns that civil rights lawyers can use in court, but systematic enough that they never feel safe gathering." Williams paused the recording, studying Rodriguez's anguished expression. "How long had they been using these tactics?" "At least 8 years that I can document," Rodriguez replied. "But officers who've been on the force longer say it goes back to the early 2000s, maybe longer." The systematic nature of the harassment became clear as Rodriguez shared more recordings. Mitchell's unit had developed a sophisticated playbook for disrupting community events while maintaining plausible legal cover. They studied social media to identify upcoming gatherings, filed anonymous noise complaints to justify responses, and coordinated with sympathetic dispatch operators to ensure quick response times. "They called it community management," Rodriguez explained. "Breaking up any event that might build solidarity or political organization. Birthday parties, block parties, church fundraisers, anything that brought people together in a positive way was a target." One particularly damning recording captured Mitchell training newer officers in harassment techniques during a shift briefing that Rodriguez had secretly documented. "The goal isn't arrests," Mitchell's voice explained with professional detachment. "Arrests create paperwork and potential legal challenges. The goal is humiliation. Make them feel powerless in front of their families. Make children lose respect for their parents. Break down social structures that might challenge our authority." Williams leaned forward with growing amazement. They were systematically destroying community cohesion as official policy? "Unofficial but systematic," Rodriguez clarified. "Nothing ever went in writing. But every officer in the unit knew the real mission. We weren't protecting and serving, we were occupying and controlling." The financial evidence Rodriguez had gathered was equally damaging. He'd photographed deposit slips, recorded conversations about money distribution, and even secretly filmed meetings between officers and drug dealers. His evidence showed that corruption proceeds were distributed through a complex system that ensured officer loyalty while maintaining deniability for supervisors. Mitchell wasn't the top, Rodriguez revealed. She reported directly to Deputy Chief Morrison, but even he answered to someone higher. "I heard phone calls mentioning the commissioner's office and political protection, but I could never get close enough to record those conversations." The scope of community damage documented in Rodriguez's files was staggering. He'd compiled a list of over 200 community events that had been disrupted by Mitchell's unit over 5 years. Birthday parties, graduation celebrations, church fundraisers, youth sports leagues, every positive community activity had been systematically targeted for harassment. "They kept score," Rodriguez said, showing Williams a notebook where Mitchell tracked community interventions like a sales manager tracking quarterly numbers. 37 disrupted events in 1 month was her personal record. She was proud of it. But Rodriguez's most devastating evidence involved the targeting of specific community leaders. He'd recorded Mitchell and Morrison discussing individuals who posed political threats, planning systematic harassment designed to destroy their credibility and effectiveness. They had files on ministers, school board members, community activists, anyone who might organize resistance, Rodriguez explained. The goal was to either co-opt them through threats or destroy them through false arrests and financial pressure. Agent Thompson had been identified as a potential threat 6 months before his arrest, Rodriguez revealed. His community involvement, his obvious intelligence, and his refusal to be intimidated had marked him as someone requiring special attention. They suspected he might be federal law enforcement, Rodriguez said, but they thought he was DEA or ATF, investigating drug activity. They never suspected he was documenting their civil rights violations. The birthday party incident had been a deliberate test, Rodriguez confirmed. Mitchell's unit had received orders to escalate harassment until Thompson either revealed himself or demonstrated he could be broken like other community members. The plan was to arrest him in front of his son, Rodriguez explained, humiliate him completely, then offer to drop charges if he became an informant against his neighbors. They wanted to flip him into betraying the community that trusted him. Williams reviewed Rodriguez's evidence with growing appreciation for its comprehensiveness. Audio recordings, financial documents, internal communications, witness statements, and photographic evidence. It was a prosecutor's dream case. Officer Rodriguez, why are you coming forward now? Why risk everything? Rodriguez's eyes filled with tears as he considered the question. Because I watched Agent Thompson take all that abuse to protect his investigation. Watching him let them humiliate him while he was secretly gathering evidence to save the same people they were terrorizing. If he could sacrifice 8 months of his life for justice, I could sacrifice my career. The community response to Rodriguez's cooperation had been mixed, but mostly supportive. Some residents viewed him as complicit in years of abuse, too little too late, but others understood that his testimony was essential for ensuring convictions and preventing future corruption. The community needs to heal, Rodriguez said. But healing requires truth. Complete truth about how systematic this was, how high it reached, how long it lasted. People need to understand this wasn't just bad cops, this was institutional policy. Williams presented Rodriguez's evidence to the federal grand jury the following week. 23 citizens from across Maryland listened to hours of recorded conversations, reviewed thousands of documents, and heard testimony from 47 community members who'd suffered under the corruption network. The grand jury's response was swift and decisive. 97 federal felony indictments were issued against 34 officers, 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, and 5 civilians who'd participated in the money laundering operation. The charges ranged from civil rights violations to racketeering, drug trafficking conspiracy to obstruction of justice. But perhaps most importantly, Rodriguez's evidence had provided a roadmap for preventing future corruption. The systematic nature of the harassment, the institutional protection that enabled it, and the political connections that sustained it were all documented with precision that would inform federal oversight and reform efforts. Marcus Thompson, now 9 years old, had requested to testify before the grand jury. Federal prosecutors initially resisted, concerned about traumatizing a child, but his parents supported his desire to speak about what he'd witnessed. The bad policeman made my daddy kneel in the dirt on my birthday, Marcus told the grand jurors in a voice that was clear and strong despite his youth. But my daddy was really a good policeman all along, and he was protecting everyone. The bad policeman didn't know that good always wins. His simple testimony proved more powerful than hours of expert analysis. Grand jurors later said that Marcus's words crystallized why their work mattered, why holding corrupt officials accountable was essential for protecting innocent families. Community leaders organized prayer vigils outside the courthouse during grand jury proceedings. Mrs. Washington, now recovering from hip surgery, attended every day in her wheelchair, holding a sign that read, "Justice for all God's children." Agent Thompson lived in our community for 8 months, she told reporters. He ate at our tables, played with our children, and listened to our fears. He could have arrested those officers on day 1, but he stayed to build a case strong enough to change everything. That's love in action. The evidence package assembled by federal prosecutors eventually filled 47 file boxes. Audio recordings, surveillance photographs, financial records, internal police communications, and witness statements combined to create an irrefutable portrait of systematic corruption designed to terrorize communities while enriching corrupt officials. Deputy Chief Morrison's resignation came the day before his scheduled grand jury appearance. In a brief statement, he claimed health concerns prevented him from continuing his law enforcement career. He made no mention of the federal charges he was facing or the communities he'd helped terrorize. Mitchell, meanwhile, remained defiant even as evidence of her crimes mounted. Her attorney filed motions claiming selective prosecution and federal overreach, arguing that local police tactics shouldn't be subject to federal oversight. The motions were quickly dismissed by federal judges who found the civil rights violations too obvious and systematic to defend. Rodriguez's cooperation had opened floodgates of additional evidence. Other officers began providing information in exchange for reduced sentences. Civilian witnesses who'd been too intimidated to speak out initially found courage in numbers. Community members who'd suffered harassment for years finally had a forum where their testimony would be believed and acted upon. The truth was finally emerging, and its scope was more devastating than anyone had imagined. What had begun with a destroyed birthday party had revealed institutional corruption that had poisoned law enforcement in America's 8th largest city for nearly a decade. Justice was no longer a hope. It was inevitable. The federal courthouse in Baltimore had never seen crowds like this. 3 months after the viral birthday party arrest, U.S. Attorney Patricia Williams stood before a packed courtroom and a wall of television cameras to announce the conclusion of the largest police corruption prosecution in Maryland history. Outside, community members filled the plaza, holding signs demanding justice and accountability for years of systematic abuse. "Today marks a reckoning," Williams began, her voice carrying across the hushed courtroom. 97 federal felony convictions. 34 police officers, 3 judges, 2 prosecutors, and 5 civilian conspirators have pleaded guilty or been found guilty of crimes ranging from civil rights violations to racketeering conspiracy. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell sat at the defendant's table, her uniform replaced by an orange prison jumpsuit, her arrogant swagger gone. The woman who'd spent years terrorizing families now faced federal sentencing guidelines that would keep her in prison until she was an elderly woman. Her attorney had advised her to show remorse, but Mitchell's face remained a mask of bitter defiance. Judge Catherine Martinez, appointed specifically for this case due to local judicial corruption, reviewed the sentencing documents with careful attention to detail. At 62 years old, she'd seen every type of police misconduct case, but the systematic nature of this conspiracy had shocked even her experienced perspective. "Lieutenant Mitchell," Judge Martinez began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority, "you have been convicted of conspiracy to violate civil rights, racketeering, drug trafficking conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. But before I pronounce this sentence, I want you to understand exactly what you've done to this community." The judge gestured toward the gallery where dozens of Mitchell's victims sat with their families. Marcus Thompson, now 9 years old, sat between his parents in the front row, wearing his best suit and holding a drawing he'd made showing FBI helicopters and birthday cake. "You terrorized a federal agent and traumatized his 8-year-old son on what should have been one of the happiest days of his young life," Judge Martinez continued. "But that was just one day in a campaign of systematic oppression that lasted years." James Thompson stood when invited to give his victim impact statement. 8 months of undercover work followed by months of testimony and depositions had taken their toll, but his voice was strong and clear as he addressed the woman who'd humiliated his family. "Lieutenant Mitchell, you called my son's birthday party a ghetto circus. You forced me to my knees in front of my child and called me boy. You threw my federal credentials in the dirt and laughed about it." He paused, looking directly at Mitchell, who refused to meet his eyes. "But the worst part wasn't what you did to my family. The worst part was realizing that you'd been doing this to innocent families for years. Families who had no federal badge to protect them. Families who couldn't fight back against your systematic cruelty." Mitchell's hands trembled slightly as she listened, but her face remained impassive. "You asked me what kind of man I was," James continued. I'm the kind of man who spent 8 months living in a community, building genuine relationships, protecting people I'd grown to love while documenting your crimes. I'm the kind of man who lets himself be humiliated to ensure justice for others." He turned toward the judge. "Your Honor, Lieutenant Mitchell represents everything wrong with policing in America. She used her badge as a weapon against the people she was sworn to protect. She turned public service into personal profit while terrorizing communities that depended on law enforcement." Mrs. Washington, now using a walker but determined to be present, struggled to her feet when called to testify. At 74 years old, she represented 3 generations of her family who'd suffered under Mitchell's unit. "That woman destroyed my grandson's graduation party," she said, her voice carrying decades of dignity despite institutional abuse. "Called our celebration of his acceptance to medical school a gang gathering. Made him lie face down on the ground in front of his little sister while she searched him for weapons that didn't exist." She pointed directly at Mitchell with a shaking finger. "You tried to break our spirits. You tried to make us afraid to celebrate our children's achievements. But we're still here, and our children are still succeeding, and your reign of terror is over." The parade of victim impact statements continued for 2 hours. Parents whose children's birthday parties had been destroyed, church leaders whose fundraising events had been disrupted, teenagers who'd been falsely arrested and humiliated, small business owners who'd been extorted. Each story revealed another layer of systematic abuse designed to destroy community cohesion. Maya Thompson spoke about the personal cost of her husband's undercover work and Mitchell's crimes. "I watched my husband carry the weight of pretending to be helpless while documenting injustice. I watched him struggle with leading a double life while protecting people who'd become our friends. And I watched our son process the trauma of seeing his father humiliated by someone who was supposed to protect us." But perhaps the most powerful testimony came from Marcus himself. The 9-year-old had insisted on speaking, despite prosecutors' concerns about putting a child through the ordeal. "The bad policewoman ruined my birthday party," Marcus said simply, his young voice carrying clearly through the silent courtroom. "She made my daddy kneel down and called him bad names. She made me cry and scared all my friends." He looked directly at Mitchell with the fearless honesty only children possess. "But my daddy was really a hero all along. He was pretending to be regular so he could catch the bad police and keep everyone safe. I'm proud of my daddy for being so brave." Mitchell's attorney made a final plea for leniency, arguing that his client had been following orders and department culture rather than acting independently. But Judge Martinez's response was swift and unforgiving. "Miss Mitchell's crimes were not momentary lapses in judgment or responses to impossible situations," the judge declared. "They were systematic violations of constitutional rights, planned and executed over years with obvious pleasure in the suffering they caused." She reviewed the evidence methodically. Audio recordings prove that Miss Mitchell took personal satisfaction in humiliating families. Financial records show she profited extensively from drug-related corruption. Witness testimony demonstrates a pattern of targeting community events specifically to destroy social cohesion. The courtroom fell into absolute silence as Judge Martinez prepared to announce the sentence. "Sarah Mitchell, you are hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without possibility of parole. You are permanently barred from any law enforcement position and required to pay restitution of $200,000 to community victims." Gasps and quiet sobs filled the courtroom. Mitchell's face finally showed emotion, not remorse, but rage at the consequences she was facing. Her defense attorney quickly moved for appeal, but the evidence was overwhelming and the sentences legally unassailable. Officer Barnes received 18 years. Detective Cruz got 15 years. Deputy Chief Morrison, whose cooperation had helped convict higher-level conspirators, received 12 years despite his assistance. Every member of Mitchell's unit faced significant federal prison time, but the institutional reckoning extended beyond individual prosecutions. Judge Martinez announced the implementation of comprehensive federal oversight for the entire Baltimore Police Department, including civilian oversight boards with real authority and federal monitors with access to all department communications. "This consent decree will remain in effect for a minimum of 10 years, she declared. "Federal oversight will ensure that constitutional violations like those documented in this case never happen again." Community leaders had organized a massive celebration outside the courthouse following the sentencing. Marcus Thompson cut a ribbon at a temporary podium while hundreds of families who'd suffered under corrupt policing cheered his courage in testifying. "Today is Marcus's real birthday party," announced Mrs. Washington, whose family had organized the event. "The birthday party that should have happened 9 months ago before it was destroyed by criminals wearing badges." The celebration featured the same menu that had been scattered across Druid Hill Park during the original incident: potato salad, fried chicken, and a Spider-Man birthday cake identical to the one Mitchell had destroyed. But this time, children played safely while reformed police officers provided security with genuine community support. James Thompson was sworn in as FBI Assistant Director for Community Relations during the courthouse celebration, his promotion a symbol of federal commitment to rebuilding trust between law enforcement and communities. His acceptance speech focused on healing and prevention rather than punishment. Lieutenant Mitchell and her conspirators believed they were untouchable, he told the gathered crowd. They believed their badges gave them permission to terrorize innocent families. Today proves that no one is above the law, and constitutional rights will be protected by federal authority when local systems fail. Maya Thompson announced the establishment of the Marcus Thompson Community Justice Foundation, funded partially by restitution payments from convicted officers. The foundation would provide legal assistance to families facing police harassment and support community organizing efforts in neighborhoods targeted by systematic abuse. "My family paid a price for justice," Maya said. 8 months of living a double life, trauma from that destroyed birthday party, and ongoing security concerns. But we paid that price so other families wouldn't have to suffer what we suffered. Marcus, now a celebrity among his classmates for his role in bringing down corrupt cops, spoke with remarkable composure for a 9-year-old who'd helped convict federal criminals. "The bad police thought they could scare us," he said into the microphone. "But good always wins when people are brave enough to do what's right. My daddy was brave, and Mrs. Washington was brave, and Mr. Rodriguez was brave, and now kids can have birthday parties without bad police ruining them." The media coverage was extensive and overwhelmingly positive. Cable news shows featured panel discussions about federal oversight of local policing. Social media campaigns celebrated the sentences while calling for similar accountability in other jurisdictions. International media highlighted the case as evidence that American institutions could still deliver justice when properly motivated. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from the community itself. A year after Mitchell's sentencing, Druid Hill Park hosted its first annual Justice Day celebration, featuring exactly the kind of positive community gathering that her unit had spent years trying to destroy. Mitchell began serving her 25-year sentence at a federal prison in West Virginia, far from Baltimore and the communities she'd terrorized. According to her prison records, she continued to maintain her innocence and blame federal overreach for her conviction. She would be eligible for release in 2049 when she was 67 years old. The systematic corruption that had poisoned Baltimore policing for nearly a decade was finally dismantled. Community members could gather safely for celebrations. Children could play in parks without fear of harassment. Families could call police for help without worrying about becoming victims themselves. Justice had been served, comprehensively and publicly. The reckoning was complete, but the work of rebuilding trust and maintaining accountability would continue for years to come. The destroyed birthday party had become a symbol of resistance, resilience, and the ultimate triumph of constitutional rights over institutional oppression. 2 years after Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell was led away in handcuffs, Druid Hill Park buzzed with the same joyful energy that had filled it on Marcus Thompson's 8th birthday. But everything had changed. The pavilion now bore a bronze plaque reading Thompson Community Justice Park, and the police officers present wore genuine smiles as they helped children with face painting and balloon animals. Marcus, now 10 years old and 3 inches taller, stood at a podium addressing a crowd of families who'd gathered for the 2nd annual Justice Day celebration. His voice carried confidence that came from understanding his role in transforming an entire city's approach to policing. 2 years ago, bad police came to my birthday party and tried to scare my family, he began, his words clear and strong. They didn't know my daddy was really an FBI agent working to protect everyone. They thought they could be mean to people and never get in trouble. He paused, looking out at faces that included former victims of police harassment alongside community leaders, federal officials, and reformed law enforcement officers who'd embraced accountability and genuine public service. But good people fought back, and now kids can have birthday parties without being afraid. Now police officers help with celebrations instead of ruining them. My daddy says that's what justice looks like when everyone works together. The crowd erupted in applause as Marcus cut the ribbon on a new community center that bore his name. The Marcus Thompson Community Justice Center would provide legal assistance, police accountability training, and conflict resolution services for residents across Baltimore. The funding came partially from federal grants, partially from restitution payments from convicted officers, and partially from community fundraising that demonstrated the neighborhood's commitment to positive change. James Thompson, now FBI Assistant Director for Community Relations, watched his son with pride that went beyond typical parental affection. Marcus had chosen to testify against Mitchell despite his youth, had endured media attention with remarkable grace, and had become a symbol of childhood resilience in the face of institutional abuse. "Every day I'm reminded why this work matters," James told the gathered crowd when called to speak. 2 years ago, my family experienced the worst of what policing can become when officers forget they serve the community. Today, we're celebrating the best of what law enforcement can be when accountability and community partnership guide our actions. The new Baltimore Police Department bore little resemblance to the corrupt institution that Mitchell and Morrison had led. Federal oversight had resulted in comprehensive reforms, mandatory body cameras that couldn't be disabled, civilian oversight boards with real authority, community policing initiatives that required officers to attend neighborhood events, and transparent complaint processes that ensured citizen concerns were investigated thoroughly. Officer Jennifer Martinez, a rookie who'd graduated from the Reformed Police Academy, worked the crowd with obvious comfort and genuine community support. She'd grown up in East Baltimore, graduated from the same high school as many of the children at the celebration, and chose law enforcement specifically to help heal the damage caused by years of abusive policing. The old department saw community gatherings as potential threats to be controlled, she explained to a group of teenagers who were considering law enforcement careers. The new department sees them as opportunities to build relationships and earn trust. "We're not occupying these neighborhoods anymore. We're part of them." Maya Thompson had transformed her experience as a victim of police harassment into a career advocating for systemic change. The Marcus Thompson Community Justice Foundation, which she now directed full-time, had helped over 200 families navigate interactions with law enforcement, file complaints against abusive officers, and access legal resources when their rights were violated. "Healing doesn't happen automatically after bad people are arrested," she told supporters at a fundraising table surrounded by children's artwork depicting positive police interactions. Communities need resources, support, and ongoing advocacy to ensure that reforms actually improve daily life for families. The Foundation's most successful program paired families who'd experienced police harassment with reformed officers, committed to rebuilding trust through regular community engagement. Officer Rodriguez, the whistleblower whose testimony had been crucial for Mitchell's conviction, now spent his off-duty hours coaching youth basketball and attending community meetings to address residents' concerns about policing. "I spent 15 years being part of the problem," Rodriguez told a group of parents whose children were playing nearby. "Now I'm spending whatever time I have left being part of the solution. It doesn't erase what happened, but it honors the courage of families like the Thompsons who fought for justice." Mrs. Washington, now 76 but still sharp and determined, had become an unofficial grandmother to children whose families had been affected by corrupt policing. She spent her afternoons at the community center, helping with homework and sharing stories about the civil rights movement that put current struggles in historical perspective. "This little celebration reminds me of the freedom schools we ran in Mississippi during the 1960s, she told visitors touring the community center's civil rights education display. "Back then, we were fighting for the right to vote and attend integrated schools. Today, our children are fighting for the right to celebrate birthdays without harassment from people who are supposed to protect them." The display included photographs from Marcus's original birthday party, documentation from the federal investigation, and artwork created by community children depicting their hopes for positive police relationships. One drawing showed FBI helicopters delivering birthday cake to children, while another depicted police officers and families holding hands around a picnic table. Federal oversight of the Baltimore Police Department had become a model for similar interventions across the country. Justice Department officials regularly brought delegations from other cities to observe community policing initiatives that had grown from the systematic accountability imposed after Mitchell's conviction. Baltimore proves that comprehensive reform is possible when federal authorities have the will to enforce constitutional rights, explained Justice Department Civil Rights Division Attorney Michael Chang during a tour that included law enforcement officials from 6 other cities. But sustainable change requires community engagement, not just federal mandates. The statistics spoke to real transformation. Complaints against police officers had dropped by 68% since federal oversight began. Community trust in law enforcement had increased from 23% to 57% according to annual surveys. Most importantly, positive police interactions. Officers helping with community events, mediating disputes, and providing assistance during emergencies had increased by over 300%. Marcus had become something of a celebrity among his classmates, but his parents worked to ensure his fame didn't overshadow normal childhood development. He played soccer, struggled with math homework, and complained about having to clean his room just like any other 10-year-old. "Sometimes kids at school call me the FBI boy," he confided to his father during a quiet moment at the celebration. "They think it's cool that you caught bad guys, but I just want them to know I'm regular too." James knelt down to his son's level, remembering similar conversations from his own childhood about being different and finding normal. "Being regular and being special aren't opposites, buddy. You helped make things better for lots of families. That's special. But you're also just Marcus, who likes Spider-Man and hates Brussels sprouts. That's regular." As the Justice Day celebration wound down, families began cleaning up with the same community spirit that had characterized the original birthday party 2 years earlier. But this time, police officers helped load tables and sweep up trash, working alongside residents they now knew by name rather than viewing as potential threats. The bronze plaque commemorating the park's renaming included a quote from Marcus's grand jury testimony. "Good always wins when people are brave enough to do what's right." Below it, someone had added fresh flowers and a child's drawing of a birthday cake shared between police officers and families. Mitchell remained in federal prison, serving the 5th year of her 25-year sentence. According to correctional reports, she continued to maintain her innocence and blame federal overreach for her conviction. She would not be eligible for release until Marcus Thompson was 34 years old. But her absence had created space for healing, accountability, and genuine public service. The destroyed birthday party had become a symbol of resistance that grew into institutional change affecting thousands of families across Baltimore. As the Thompson family drove home from the celebration, Marcus fell asleep in the back seat wearing his Justice Day t-shirt and clutching a balloon shaped like the FBI shield. Through the car window, James could see community members and police officers working together to secure the park for another night. Justice wasn't just an abstract concept anymore. It was children playing safely while officers who'd earned trust provided protection with genuine community support. The birthday party had been restored, multiplied, and transformed into something larger than any one family's celebration. Hope lives here now, growing stronger every day. If this story of real justice moved you, subscribe for more stories where accountability wins over corruption. Share this everywhere. Let the world see what happens when communities fight back with courage and federal support. Comment below. What should happen to officers who abuse their power? Like this video if you believe justice should be this comprehensive. Your voice amplifies justice. Use it.